They were rampaging along, won their first 2 games. They've lost their last 2, but they could have probably won both of them.
Fantastic looking facility there in the deep south.
I'm sure they're going to come out firing tonight.
From memory, he was leading last week. Are you going to be leading this week, or?
From bottom with 6 points and second from bottom with 5. Yes and no. Yes and no. It paid off for them. They got a 2, double the 4 and won 6 points. Depends what the teams above you do, doesn't it?
Unbiased, Miles Davis.
Welcome to another episode of Unbiased with Miles Davis, where we go and find out about the stories behind the beautiful game of lawn bowls in New Zealand. I've got a very special guest with me today who a lot of the bowling community will know, but probably even more of the wider New Zealand community will know. Commentator, pundit extraordinaire, John McBeth joins me. John, thank you so much for your time. I'm looking forward to this. Firstly, I'm aware that you were born in the environ of Timaru. Tell us about that. Where did you first make your appearance in the world?
Well, it was in fact Kurau, which later became famous because some All Black captain who played a few tests was brought up there. So Kurau was where I was born, but I was only there for 2 weeks, Miles, because in those days my father was a rabbiter and a shearer. So in whatever season it was at the time, it was June. He was working on a station in Amarama, which had the nearest maternity home in Kurau. So my parents told me that it was not even worth the effort, really. They dragged me down in this old car on a bumpy old shingle road from Amarama to Kurau. I was born there, apparently never stopped crying all the time I was in Kurau. And whether it was coincidence or not, the Kurau maternity home burned down not long afterwards. I think there was a story going that they didn't want another baby born there who cried as much as I did. So Kurau was my birthplace.
Right, so you end up in Timaru.
Yes.
Where do you go to school there, John?
Well, it was Catholic upbringing. My parents moved from the Mackenzie country into Timaru and bought a corner store, a dairy just down from Fraser Park, the rugby ground in Timaru. And I went to, again, a trail of destruction, really, St. Joseph's Primary School, which is now a block of flats, to Marist Brothers for sort of intermediate schooling. And, you know, there's no Marist Brothers in the country now. And then on to the one true St. Pat's in New Zealand. That was St. Patrick's High School in Timaru, which is now called Roncalli College, as they mixed up with or joined forces with the girls' school next door. So that was my college education. And from there, my heavy involvement in sport, playing everything I could, got me into, eventually into radio broadcasting. But first of all, Miles, it was getting into the music side of things, which you would love because you've got such a great music bent and a great knowledge of music and memory for music.
So now, first run us through the sporting side of things. What sports activities were your favourites? What did you excel in?
Well, it's pretty excel. I'll take that word out. Could you edit out the word excel? I tried everything, honestly. In those days, of course, we're talking about the 50s and 60s, and 60s in particular, when, you know, I was at secondary school. It was either rugby or nothing. A few strange people at my school went off and played football, and occasionally squash and things like that. But in general, I played the main sports, and that was cricket and rugby. Rugby was my love. But after school, I tried all sorts, you know, badminton and squash and basketball. I just had a go at everything and excelled at nothing, but really enjoyed it.
You mentioned your music. Give us a bit of a background in that. Did you play an instrument? Were you in a band, or were you more into composing?
I loved the piano accordion. We had a Scottish guy down the road from us, down this road from our shop in Timaru. His name was Bill Stark. And every now and then, Mum and Dad would invite people around for a bit of a knees up. And Mum played the piano, and my father played the button accordion. They both play these with roll your own cigarettes stuck in the corner of their lips. And Bill Stark would come up with his piano accordion. And I was mesmerized by this. I just loved it. So I went to him for lessons. It wasn't long before both he and I realized that my ear for music wasn't great. I didn't want to read music and play by music. I wanted to be able to rock up to a party and just sit there and play by ear, and found that I wasn't capable of that. But I did love music. So I applied for a job at the radio station in Timaru, falsifying my credentials quite dramatically, got the job, and then because of my age and I was the new person there, selected the music for the popular programs, the pop programs at night time. But it also, Miles, and one thing I was always grateful for was that it stretched my musical knowledge quite dramatically, because I was requested to do things such as a Scottish half hour, songs from the shows, a classical half hour, and jazz music and all that sort of thing. So I just, spread my knowledge and appreciation of music quite dramatically in those days at 3XC in Timaru.
3XC, what a magnificent. First, before we move on, and I'm keen to follow on, what shop did your parents have?
They had a Foursquare store, and it was on the corner of Regent Street and Church Street West. It's now some flats. And, every Saturday I'd see people traipsing up and down to Fraser Park to watch and play rugby. And I played there sometimes myself when I eventually got into the senior team, Celtic, in Timaru. The rugby was right on my back door. But the Foursquare store I started working in it from the age of 8. So I could, and there were no computers or anything, as you know, cash register was just a till, like Arkwright, you push a button and the till would pop out and hurt your fingers. But I was great at addition and subtraction and all that sort of thing. I could, quickly add up a whole line of groceries without using any paper or anything. I was a master at that, Miles. Pity I can't do it now. But yeah, Foursquare store and knowing all the neighbours. You know what it was like back in your young days too, where the whole neighbourhood revolved around the shop, basically.
Yeah, mine was more revolving around the pub, but that's another story. But so that's fantastic. So you're working away in the shop, which is good to see, because you've got to help your parents out. Now, what age were you when you went into this radio station? Just quickly, what age were you?
I left school, so I was just 17. Went into radio, and yeah.
Right, now when you've gone in there, you've ended up on the musical side of things. When do you first get your opportunity to do something related to sport?
I was, those of you who know me recognise that my physique is not really cut out for playing, solid rugby stuff. I got hurt several times playing rugby, and on one injury break, I approached my boss at 3XE in Timaru and said I would like to produce a bit of a score result program for the afternoon on a Saturday, because in those days you'd wait until 6:30 at night, turn on the radio, and then you'd find how the other rugby games had gone on. You didn't have any results service at all. So I just went into the studio and rang around the grounds and had progress scores going throughout the afternoon on all sports. And I always remember my boss saying, I think you could probably do that, but I can't pay you for it. And that was the last thing that had entered my mind, really. So that's where it started, really, Miles. I was injured and had a desire to really provide a bit of a service around the South Canterbury area.
Yeah, see, that shows what proactivity can do. Don't just wait there for the offer. When you did that, how long did it take you doing that unpaid job on the weekend till you suddenly started thinking, I wouldn't mind a career in this, to actually get paid, to actually do more of it?
I never considered it a possibility. Really, growing up in Timaru, my ambition was to, stay in Timaru, but basically work on the radio station. In those days, get a job and stay with it, forever, unless it really did annoy you. But I did get a call from Dunedin's 4ZB one afternoon, and they asked me if I'd do a report on some cross country, I think South Island Championships. So I did that, thought no more of it. But then had a little bit of adventure struck me, and I said to my wife, Raylene, we've just got married, and I said, would you be interested in shifting to Dunedin, getting a bit of progress out of the music position that I was in? She reluctantly agreed to do this, to go to Dunedin. I went down there. The people who'd heard me doing the report from Timaru on that cross-country championship, Murray King is the guy, and you know him. He was a head of sport eventually for Radio New Zealand. But in those days, he said to me, would you be interested in doing some Saturday afternoon reports? That's where it started, in Dunedin. I was still on the music side of things, but working again Saturdays and Sundays doing the odd report around the grounds in Dunedin, which gave me a huge thrill. In fact, Miles, it took over my broadcasting life, really. I looked forward to the weekends more than I did going in on a Monday to do the music things.
Right, okay, so you've quickly just skipped, you see. We don't like people who skip, John. We've got to get through there. You mentioned your lovely wife. Suddenly she's appeared. We haven't had any background on it. We need background now. Where did you first meet, the pair of you? Who asked the other one out, and how did it end up with you two getting married?
I'll give you the edited version. When I was working in the shop, when I said I started there at age 8, I must have been about 14 or so when she came into the shop. She was staying with an auntie and uncle just round the corner, and that's when I first met her. But I didn't really have anything to do with it. We never saw each other again until I went to a 21st birthday party of a good friend, Doug Gold, who started up More FM in New Zealand.
He did very well for himself, didn't he?
Yes, yeah. That's right. So he often claims responsibility for Ray and I meeting, or Ray as she's recognised really. But so we met at this 21st and eventually dated a bit. And then she was from Orari, which is just out of Geraldine on the main road. She went to Geraldine High School. We married in between Timaru and Geraldine at Temuka, and eventually we had 2 sons. So that's it. She's a registered nurse, and she's only just finished nursing because of COVID, because she's got a bronchial situation, and it just compromised her really. So 54 years of nursing just came to an end last year.
Oh, that's sad to hear that. But can you remember the proposal, John?
Yes, I do. Actually. It was I was trying to be smart. She was at our place one evening, and I said, "Look, let's go downtown and just have a look around. I'm a bit bored here." So we went down. I'd arranged for the jeweler to be open after hours at 6 o'clock or something, and her eyes lit up, and well, I think they did. And I said to her, "Oh, look, I've just decided that come and have a look at this ring. Would you be interested in this ring?" Sort of thing like that, So it was a proposal pretty much just outside a jewellery shop.
Oh, you romantic old
I didn't
fool.
get down on my knees or anything. And I think she said, unfortunately, she agreed to it, but she's still with me, Miles, and that's coming up to nearly 50 years.
That's fantastic. That's it takes people don't. I don't know if people realise how much it takes from both parties to make a relationship last that long. So you both deserve a lot of credit for it. Perhaps she deserves more than you do. But anyway, we'll move onwards.
Yes,
so now you're domiciled in Dunedin. You're plodding your way through your music, but you're excited for the weekends. When do you first get what you would consider that step up, that opportunity to move into the career that we all know you for?
In 1975, the broadcasting group was called NZ, New Zealand Broadcasting Corporation. It included television and radio. There was a split, so TVNZ or TV1 went off, and TV2 or whatever they were, they formed became a separate entity. Radio New Zealand took the radio side of things. Some of the radio sports people around the country, such as Keith Quinn, Philip Leishman, Brendan Telfer, those sort of people, all went off to television. And so there were some vacancies in the radio side of things. So this was 1975. I, after much deliberation, decided that I'd apply for a job that was going in Dunedin at 4ZB. And got the job. So that was at 1975. I suddenly became a fully fledged radio sports reporter with no journalistic training at all, Miles, and that sort of came through, experience. In those days, we were just reporters or commentators, and eventually we became sports journalists, and I just went along with that flow over many years. So that was it, 1975. So how many years ago was that? 25?
A lot. Yeah, we'll go 46. But anyway, we'll carry on. Now, you mentioned commentating. So when do you first get your big commentary gig?
Ian Galloway, who passed away recently, was one of our most outstanding commentators, particularly in cricket, but also in rugby. He'd been at Carisbrook, the voice of Carisbrook, since the previous commentator, whose nickname was Wang Mackenzie. He used to say, "Wang, there it goes." And so Wang Mackenzie, Ian Galloway decided to retire at the end of the 1977 season. Bill Francis, who was my boss there, and I went out seeking auditions from people. They were all, and they would admit this themselves, hopeless. So eventually I put my hand up and said, "Look, can I have a go at this? I may as well." So I did, and I got the job there. So 1978, I became the commentator at Carisbrook, and that really was the start of my commentary roles.
Right. In terms of, because I know that goes in and out. 1 minute Quinn's there, and then he gets the boot, and then you come in, and then you're out.
Yeah.
And it's quite a volatile industry.
Oh,
so,
yes.
so the longevity of the likes of yourself and Telfer and Quinn is quite a testament to your guys' ability and durability.
I think, and the fact too that we got on so well together, we could take the hits and still have a drink afterwards, and we did that occasionally. Yeah, so that you're quite right. But so in 1975, so I started. Ray and I moved to Napier for a couple of years, and then to Wellington in 1980. Then John Howson was the lead commentator for Radio New Zealand at the time. When he moved on, and Grant Nisbet had gone to TV as well, he was probably the natural successor to Howson. I took on I was appointed the top New Zealand radio commentator, so I travelled with the All Blacks, went to the World Cups, did the internal tours, back in the days of those exciting things such as internal tours, and France came a couple of times, and Scotland and the British Lions and all that sort of thing. And then eventually I did a program called Boots and All on TVNZ, and that led to an invitation to join their staff full time.
So this is another good opportunity for you here, because you get into an organisation there, TVNZ, who at that time, unlike now, had control of all the major sports, including the Olympics. When did you first go to an Olympics or a Commonwealth Games, John?
1980 was to have been my first Olympic Games, Miles, and I've still got the accreditation. It's one of my prized memorabilia pieces, accreditation for Moscow. But of course, New Zealand pulled out of that, supporting the American-led boycott. So 1980 was to have been the first, which is quite interesting in that that was 1980, so that's 41 years ago. Tokyo was to have been my 9th Olympic Games, but I withdrew from that about close to 3 months ago because of the COVID situation. I didn't feel comfortable with it. So my first was to have been Moscow. My last was to have been Tokyo. But in between times, I'd done eight Olympic Games.
Now, I know a great story about Mr. Telfer and Mr. Quinn basically selling out. In 1976, when they're in Montreal, there was a lot of anti-New Zealand sentiment because the Africans had boycotted the games because of the All Blacks' impending tour to South Africa. So Mr. Telfer and Mr. Quinn pretended they were Australian. Now, can you think of any stories there'd be hundreds that we could talk about, John, but we just think of maybe a couple of stories that you can remember of going to these big events, these big world events, as something funny. Either you meet someone famous or something funny happens, or you get locked out of your room, or Flojo chases you around the compound or whatever.
Well, there were many. I mean, in 1984, which eventually was my first Olympic Games, we were housed, and Quinn and Telfer were there, and all, lots of other well-known commentators at the time, PJ and others, and we were staying in this very moderately priced place, a motel on Sunset Boulevard, and they were shooting a porn movie at the swimming pool. When we all came back at one stage, some of us had half a day, and we came back early afternoon, and there were all these stunning looking women and obviously not naturally tanned men there, and they were hovering around the swimming pool, and there were these cameras there, and we said, "What's going on here?" And they said, "Well, sorry, we're just recording an adult movie here, guys." So that was the sort of place we stayed in. Wild.
You didn't get a small part, like a walk-on part or anything, John?
Could you take out the word small? But that was the same place that at night time we had to barricade our doors because there were all sorts of unseemly characters there. People were getting their rooms broken into, and it was quite a frightening time, 1984, even though the government had gone in and got rid of all the riffraff, taken all the beggars and homeless people and planted them elsewhere, away from LA. It was still a rough sort of place to be, but, great Olympics.
Obviously hard to sort of distill it down, John, of your career with rugby, doing commentary on rugby and on Olympic Games and big events. Can you think of, let's go rugby first with the All Blacks. What would have been your favourite game to commentate? What was the moment that you'll look back on and think, blimey, I'm glad I was there?
I suppose you're right. It's very difficult with 80, 90 tests or whatever I did, and other matches that we travelled on through Argentina and through Britain and France. I mean, there were some extraordinary stories and memories there. But I suppose on reflection, the 1987 Rugby World Cup, at the time, we didn't know how important that was. You'll recall, listeners will recall too, that in 1987 the World Cup was a dream of some Aussies and Kiwis in particular, not getting great support from the other unions. Eventually it went ahead and it turned out to be a huge success. But even then, when the All Blacks beat France in the final at Eden Park, we didn't appreciate that it would go on to become the event that it has. So I think 1987, that was truly a special time to be there at the first Rugby World Cup, and I've been to every one since. But I think that was just enjoyable. It was amateur and sort of unknown. We didn't know what the future was. So 87, yeah. But also being there in South Africa when South Africa came back from their apartheid, the absence through apartheid, that was quite special to be there for that as well.
And with the Olympics, I mean, you would have. I know from memory. I mean, I've been here 36 years. I've heard you commentating on all sorts of things that some sports I haven't even heard of before. What event can you think back on? I know a lot of people go on about the first and second in the triathlons in Athens. There's big medal winning things. What one particularly sticks in your mind, John?
Well, I think, without doubt, one of my real highlights of my sports broadcasting career, there are three or four, and I've mentioned the 87 World Cup. I'd say the America's Cup in San Diego was just an extraordinary 6 months of fronting history there. But 1996 at Atlanta, when Daniel Loader won his first gold medal in the pool, never happened before. I kept saying to people, I don't think it'll ever happen again, but I think Lewis Clarebird is, potentially, at least a medalist this year. But so the Daniel Loader stuff was quite special, and I still sort of, the hairs stand up on the back of my neck now when I think about it. The reaction from other commentators who came up and basically congratulated Anthony Moss, who was working with me, and myself, for the performance of Daniel Loader, because they understood and recognised how important this was in New Zealand sport, that someone from New Zealand had won a gold medal in the swimming pool. So that was really special. So some special moments, and that one really stands out.
How hard was it for you to make the decision not to go this year? I mean, you've been to all of them. You're part of the landscape for us. There'll be people thinking that they've gone deaf when they don't hear your dulcet tones coming over. How hard was the decision not to go?
Oh, I agonised over it for a lot of weeks. I could sense that COVID wasn't going to go away anytime soon. And as I have done over the years, I wrote a list of, the pros and cons. The pros obviously was, another Olympics, to be involved. I love them, to catch up with all those commentators that some have known for 20 or 30 years. And working for the Olympic Broadcasting Service as I was, it was, a special time. And I was totally looking forward to it, and to go back to Tokyo after having been there for the Rugby World Cup. I just loved it. but the cons were starting to mount up as well. And the risk factor, being in that age bracket where, everyone suggests we're more vulnerable than others when you're in your 70s. You won't believe that, Miles. Of course, you'll think I've made a mistake with my age. But I thought to myself, so flying from here to Tokyo in a plane, even though I would have had the twin COVID jabs, getting to Tokyo airport, and maybe just alongside me is the team from India waiting to go through immigration. I thought to myself, I don't really want that. And then the fact mainly was the lack of an ability or permission to mix with those people that I wanted to see again. So the social side of things, I think, will be absolutely non-existent, and therefore the enjoyment factor will be practically nil. So it took a lot of agonising, Miles, but those were the main reasons.
Okay, now you're doing rugby, you're commentating on everything. You're doing Olympic Games. You're doing. I seem to remember was it 2000 or the one before here, the America's Cup here, where you were on screen 9 hours a day, even when there wasn't any sailing going on. So you can certainly chew the old hind legs off a donkey. But when did you get involved in lawn bowls? When did you first start finding a love for the game and getting involved in playing it?
Well, I think I showed you when we were doing Bowls 3-5 the season before last. I took with me to Auckland the New Zealand Bowling Association program for the national championships of 1975-76. So I reported on those for radio. So it's the first year that I got into full-time radio sports broadcasting. And that was the first major event I covered, was a bowls tournament. I recall probably one of the first famous people I interviewed was the late Phil Skoglund, who in his early 30s in those days was a bit of a strange person, and that he played bowls at such a young age, but he was magnificent. So that was the start of it. I dabbled in it at playing, at sort of invitation tournaments and that sort of thing, but it wasn't until I think the early 90s here, or maybe even 1989, because I was working radio shifts, breakfast shifts, I had a bit of time in the afternoon. There was a bowling club around the road from me in Karori in Wellington, and I used to go up there for a roll-up. Grant Nisbet and I played in the national championships and the peers, 1991 or something, as sort of first or second year bowlers. And I've always had a liking for the sport. And the older I've got, the more I like it, because it's a sport that anyone can play. That's what appeals to me. So, the young people can play it, and you can play right up until they put the last nail in your coffin, pretty much, Miles. So yeah. When did
you join the Rolimati bowling club, and tell us a bit about your ascendancy to the El Presidente of that particular club?
Well, that's easy. The last part's easy, because no one else would do it. I was keen to help out, and I was approached just to sort of maybe lift the profile of the club a little bit as well. We've really gone on from to getting much bigger numbers of players here. It's really gone extremely well. Not all to do with me, of course, Miles. I wouldn't even suggest that, but it's good timing on my behalf. But we moved from Wellington to Rolimati about 6 years ago. I joined another club here. It was more social than the one that I'm at now. That club closed down. Most of the members went to what was the Kapiti Bowling Club. We changed the name of it to Rolimati, and that's where I am. So it's 351 paces from my front door.
Oh no, it's not too bad. Not quite as good as Peter Bellis, who just has to look over his back garden and there it is. But that's still pretty good.
And Bellis is one of those people. I'm sorry, Bellis is one of those people who kept, maintained my interest. I work with Peter quite often doing commentaries for various TV networks, and I look at him and I look at the likes of Jim Scott, who won a singles title back in 1982, and these guys, they still front up at the national championships. They've been they just keep on playing. That's a great thing about this sport.
It really is. And you mentioned yourself in Nisbet. I understand you had a pretty decent go in was it the fours this year?
Well, last year we qualified with Simon Poppleton and Terry Shaw. We qualified at Tauranga, went through to post-section play, got knocked out by Morris Symes, I think. Another name, been around for such a long time and still plays with and beats the best. And this last season, I played with Grizz Wiley and Nakatai and Neil Tiplady at the Nationals in Alexandra, and we qualified there as well. And it just, the other thing about bowls is that I've been able to play it, and I've sort of felt as if I've known a little bit about what I'm talking about. And I recall when it came to the World Championships in Christchurch, a couple of those that I did was 2008 when we had Val Smith won the singles title, and Val and Joe Edwards won the pairs, and then Lawson won his 2 gold medals. It was a great time, and I felt a part of it because I'd played and seen these people on the green, knew them, was able to talk a little bit of sense along with Terry Scott, an outstanding comments person. So that it's sort of taken over my life a wee bit, Miles, with not much other commentary work, but be able to do the bowls was really good, and to be playing it at the same time was something special, and it gives you a bit more credibility, I think.
Yeah, you mentioned that actually, and I think that generally in New Zealand, because of the smallness of it in terms of population, the fact that you get a more personal relationship, it is different being a sports reporter, commentator, pundit in New Zealand than it is maybe in like the United States or the UK or in Europe, because you have a closer connection to the sports stars.
Right, and you know what it's like when you rock up to like Shannon McElroy. I remember when he beat Ryan Bester in the final of the 2016 World Championship singles at Christchurch, and afterwards I just interviewed him, rocked up and said, how about a photo? Yeah, sure. And then it was only a matter of the next season that I was playing against him in the singles at the national championships in Christchurch. What other sports can you do that in? It's extraordinary, isn't it? It was fantastic.
Yeah, I think that is one of the great things about bowls, and so many people have told me that you get the opportunity. People can enter into these nationals and they can play against these people, and they aren't looked down on by these people. They're seen as a competitor. They're given legitimacy. Now, you've achieved so many things in your career, John. What is there anything that you still hanker to do? Is there still something you think, blimey, I wouldn't mind, say, doing another Olympics, or there's some event that you want to go to and commentate on?
There's a lot I'd still like to do. I'd like to, do another America's Cup, for example, but my hearing isn't good enough now. And also I'm too old, and I'm not, it's sadly, you need good hearing these days to be taking instruction through earpieces all the time, not hair pieces, but earpieces. And the America's Cup fronting, as you mentioned, talking for hours on end was quite a strain, and it's all, seat of the pants stuff. But I really enjoyed that. I would like to do another Winter Olympics. That's something I came into quite late. I went to Vancouver, to Sochi in Russia, and then to Pyeongchang in South Korea. And I loved it. And the sport that I really loved doing was biathlon. If anyone's watched that, it's, skiing and then shooting at small targets. And it's a race, but it's one of those races that is a huge, massive test of stamina and skill and endurance. And I just, I sort of fell in love with that sport. I thought it was great. And just a pity we don't do it here. But I wouldn't mind doing another Winter Olympics, but that's scheduled for next year, and I'm not sure that the world will be a safer place by this time next year.
Well, let's keep our fingers crossed for everyone, John, and for you as well. Finally, rugby. Obviously, you love rugby. You mentioned your Marist sort of ancestry and upbringing. I can remember vividly being at the Cake Tin in Wellington for a Jubilee Cup final between Poniki, my team, and Marist St Pat's, your team, and you sitting behind me, lauding it and gloating as your team went on to victory, and you traumatised my then 7-year-old son who cried at the end of the game. Are you still going to those games and traumatising people, John, or have you just watched it on the telly now?
Well, I don't watch nearly as much as I used to, and whether it's because I've had a surplus of rugby over the years, I certainly don't watch it, but I still take a huge interest in it. I don't go into the Cape Town as much as I used to, even though I can go and with my gold card for nothing. But I still go to the big games and also to the odd club match. And up here, the Paraparamu Rugby Club held their centennial recently. My old mate Keith Quinn and I went along as guest speakers, and we both came out of it saying, this is what rugby was all about. Hey, good blokes and people having a good time, playing rugby for the love of it, supporting it, volunteering. Yep, that's it. That's rugby.
It certainly is, John. What a lovely way to end this. Well, we all wish you the best, both in your bowling career, both for Rolimati at the bowling club, and hopefully we'll hear your dulcet tones at the Winter Olympics, should you be able to make it over there. Thank you very much indeed for your time, John McBeth.
Thank you, Miles. It's been my pleasure, mate.
They were rampaging along, won their first 2 games. They've lost their last 2, but they could have probably won both of them.
Fantastic looking facility there in the deep south.
I'm sure they're going to come out firing tonight.
From memory, he was leading last week. Are you going to be leading this week, or?
For bottom with 6 points and second for bottom with 5. Yes and no. Yes and no. It paid off for them. They got a 2, double the 4 and won 6 points. Depends what the teams above you do, doesn't it?
Unbiased, Miles Davis.